SilkAir Flight 185, the mysterious plunge into the Musi River. A routine flight turns tragic. On December 19, 1997, SilkAir Flight 185, a Boeing 73-7300, departed Soekarno-Hatta International Airport in Jakarta, Indonesia, bound for Singapore Changi Airport. The flight, operated by SilkAir, a subsidiary of Singapore Airlines, was supposed to be a short 80-minute journey. It carried 97 passengers and 7 crew members, including a mix of business travelers, families and tourists. The aircraft was piloted by Captain Su Wei Ming, a 41-year-old former Republic of Singapore Air Force pilot with over 7,000 hours of flight experience, and First Officer Duncan Ward, a 23-year-old New Zealander with around 2,500 hours of flying time. At 3:37 p.m. local time, the plane took off from Jakarta and climbed smoothly to its assigned cruising altitude of 3,500 feet. For the next 35 minutes, everything seemed normal. The pilots communicated routinely with air traffic control, and no distress signals were ever sent. Then, in the blink of an eye, tragedy struck. The fatal dive, at 4:37 p.m., SilkAir Flight 185 suddenly entered a steep and rapid descent. In just 36 seconds, the aircraft plummeted from 3,500 feet to the ground at nearly supersonic speeds, breaking apart upon impact in the Musi River near Palembang, Sumatra. The force of the crash was so extreme that it left no identifiable bodies. Only small fragments of human remains and wreckage were found scattered in the water. Investigators were immediately puzzled. The plane had been flying normally just moments before, and no distress call was ever transmitted. Why did a perfectly functioning jet suddenly nosedive at such an incredible speed? The investigation begins. Authorities from Indonesia's National Transportation Safety Committee, NTSC, along with the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, and Boeing, launched an extensive investigation. One of the first discoveries was particularly disturbing. Both the cockpit voice recorder, CVR, and flight data recorder, FDR, had stopped recording minutes before the crash. This was highly unusual, as recorders are designed to run until an aircraft impacts the ground or loses power due to a mechanical failure. Despite extensive analysis, there was no clear evidence of any mechanical malfunction that could have caused the crash. Instead, investigators began looking at human factors, particularly the actions of the pilot in command, Captain Su Wei Ming. Pilot suicide theory, a troubled captain. As investigators examined the background of Captain Su Wei Ming, troubling details emerged: financial struggles. Reports suggested the captain had been facing severe financial difficulties, including heavy stock market losses, and mounting personal debt. Disciplinary issues. SilkAir had recently demoted him from his management position due to previous infractions. Unusual behavior. Colleagues reported that he had been acting strangely in the days leading up to the crash. These revelations led to speculation that the captain might have deliberately crashed the plane in an act of murder-suicide. A theory that would later be associated with Germanwings Flight 952520115 and Egypt Air Flight 9901999. The NTSB strongly supported this theory, arguing that the intentional deactivation of the recorders suggested deliberate human intervention. The extreme nosedive and lack of any distress call also pointed toward a suicidal act rather than an accident. However, the Indonesian NTSC refused to reach a conclusion. Their final report, released in 2000, stated that there was not enough evidence to determine whether the crash was caused by mechanical failure, human error, or deliberate action. The families of the victims filed lawsuits against Boeing, arguing that the crash was caused by a rudder defect, similar to previous Boeing 737 incidents like United Airlines Flight 585199 and US Air Flight 4271994. However, Boeing denied responsibility, and US courts eventually ruled in their favor, reinforcing the suicide theory. To this day, SilkAir Flight 185 remains officially classified as having an undetermined cause. A mystery that haunts aviation. The tragic loss of SilkAir Flight 185 left behind 104 grieving families and an enduring mystery. Unlike many other aviation disasters, where clear technical failures or human errors are identified, this case remains one of the most controversial and debated crashes in history. Did Captain Zhu Weiming deliberately take his passengers to their deaths? Or was it a catastrophic failure that investigators simply couldn't detect? With no survivors, no clear flight recorder data, and conflicting conclusions, the true cause of the crash may never be fully known. But for the loved ones of those lost that day, the painful questions remain unanswered, unsettling, and unresolved. Pilot suicide theory versus mechanical failure. The ongoing debate. The crash of SilkAir Flight 185 remains one of the most controversial cases in aviation history, largely because of the conflicting conclusions drawn by different investigative bodies. Two primary theories have emerged over the years: pilot suicide and mechanical failure. While the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, leaned heavily toward the suicide theory, Indonesian authorities declined to assign blame, leaving the case officially unresolved. The pilot suicide theory, the NTSB's stance was based on several troubling factors: unexplained disabling of black boxes, the cockpit voice recorder, CVR, and flight data recorder, FDR, stopped recording minutes before the crash. This is highly unusual and suggests intentional intervention, as recorders typically run until impact or power loss. Investigators could not find any mechanical failure that would explain the simultaneous shutdown of both recorders. The mysterious nosedive. The aircraft went into a steep, nearly vertical descent at extremely high speed, something that is virtually impossible without intentional input. The dive occurred suddenly and without any known external cause, such as turbulence or a mid-air explosion, the captain's troubled past, financial problems. Reports indicated that Captain Zhu Weiming had been suffering significant financial losses, including heavy stock market investments that had turned sour, disciplinary issues. SilkAir had recently demoted him from a management position and issued disciplinary warnings. The psychological state. Some reports suggested he had been acting unusual and withdrawn in the days leading up to the crash. Parallels with other pilot suicide cases. Similar patterns were later observed in Germanwings Flight 9-525201-5 and Egypt Air Flight 9-9019-999, where pilots were found to have deliberately crashed their planes. Based on these findings, the NTSB concluded in 2000 that the crash was likely an intentional act by the captain, even though Indonesian authorities never officially endorsed this conclusion. The mechanical failure theory. While the suicide theory gained traction, some experts and Boeing itself pointed to a potential mechanical failure, specifically a rudder malfunction. Past Boeing 737 rudder issues, United Airlines Flight 5851991, and US Air Flight 4271994, both involved Boeing 737 aircraft that suffered uncommanded rudder movements leading to fatal crashes. Discussed the defecate way that a defect in the rudder power control unit, PCU, could cause the rudder to suddenly deflect, making the aircraft uncontrollable. Could SilkAir 185 have suffered the same issue? Some experts argued that a rudder hardover, unintended full rudder deflection, could have caused the aircraft to enter a rapid, uncontrollable dive. However, this theory faced a major problem. Unlike the previous rudder crashes, SilkAir Flight 185's descent was far more extreme and sudden, suggesting an intentional nose-down input rather than a progressive loss of control. Lawsuits against Boeing. Families of the victims filed lawsuits against Boeing, arguing that a rudder defect was responsible for the crash. Boeing fought back, insisting there was no evidence of mechanical failure, and U.S. courts ruled in Boeing's favor, reinforcing the pilot suicide theory. The lingering mystery. Unlike many other aviation disasters, where clear technical faults or human errors are identified, SilkAir Flight 185 remains a deeply debated case, with no universally accepted explanation. The NTSB believes the captain crashed the plane deliberately. The Indonesian NTSC refused to conclude anything definitively. The possibility of a rudder malfunction, while discussed, was never proven. To this day, the true cause of the crash remains uncertain, leaving SilkAir Flight 185 as one of the most chilling mysteries in aviation history.